Greetings, AP Euro scholars, for our review on Unit 3, Absolute Monarchies versus Constitutional Monarchies. And I'm looking at the review sheet from top to bottom here. And your first question is to know or first thing to know here is the difference between France and the Netherlands in the 1600s. And France was ruled by autocratic absolute monarchs, perhaps best exemplified by Louis XIV. And you have this guy, Jacques Bossuet, who advocated divine right. And you have Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who's an advocate of a government-regulated economy. In France, the nobility under Louis XIV were forced to live in Versailles. He institutes the intendant system, which subjugates the nobility to regular government inspection in the provinces by representatives of the king, the intendants. And he earlier defeats the nobles in the Wars of the Fronde. And as king, he issues the Edict of Fontainebleau, which gets rid of the Edict of Nantes, which ends, remember, the Edict of Nantes gave religious toleration to the Huguenot Protestant Calvinist minority. And this is undone and ended with the Edict of Fontainebleau. Contrast here is in the Netherlands. Rather than have an absolute monarch, you had each of the 7 provinces had self-rule. The local nobility shared power in local parliaments. You had the national states general, which met only for foreign policy and military issues, and they chose collectively the stadtholder, which was sort of a military political leader in times of crisis. The Netherlands enjoyed limited central government. They enjoyed free trade in contrast to the mercantilism of Colbert. They had religious freedom, unlike France, and they had the most urbanization and the largest middle class in Europe at this time. Uniqueness of Dutch society, and how do you see this in the painting, The Moneylender and His Wife? Well, remember we left off earlier, during the Renaissance, the Dutch prospered because of the trade along the North Sea. And the Netherlands became known as a place with a large urban middle class. There were merchants and industrialists and bankers. And the painting you see here, you have a woman who's being distracted from reading her book, which is the Bible. And her husband is a moneylender. He's a banker. And it's just, you see this in a certain amount of Dutch art, this introspection that as they're prospering, as they're becoming wealthy, these are Calvinists. Keep in mind after the Treaty of Westphalia, and the Calvinists, the Protestants here are, good God-fearing Christians, and there's this tension between the call to faithfulness to God and the distraction, perhaps, from the idols of wealth. Interesting painting, The Moneylender and His Wife. How these people consolidated and gained and consolidated power, and how they maintained it. And I'm going to merge gaining and consolidating together here. Elizabeth I, she gains power largely through being the next in the dynastic line. Remember, her father's Henry VIII. When he dies, it goes to his son Edward VI, who rules for just a few years, and then it goes to Mary, the daughter of his first wife, and after she dies, it goes to the daughter of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Now, she maintains power partly by not marrying. Her nickname is the Virgin Queen. Remember, her mom is Anne Boleyn, who gets her head chopped off by charges of adultery. Whether or not that was true or not, Elizabeth is savvy. She's not marrying. There's this idea of the Via Media, or the Elizabethan settlement, where she dodges the religious wars that are tearing the continent apart. Keep in mind here, there's not religious toleration in any official sense, but she is not hunting people down. She is not, launching inquisitions. She's not, killing people by the thousands upon thousands. Pretty much a, keep your head down. Don't act in public dissent, and she's not after you. But very much so, the Anglican Church is the official church. But as the Anglican Church becomes this official established church in England, it is very Catholic-y. It has many characteristics of the Catholic Church. It's liturgical, has an official prayer book. It still has lots of the smells and bells and statuary, And the high church understanding of communion is very similar to the Catholic Church. And she as a woman, she takes the title of the governor of the church. She's not the ruler of the church. So she does a lot of things to sort of bring buy-in for people who miss the old Catholic Church and those who want nothing to do with being under the Pope. 1588, she defeats the invasion, the Spanish Armada that is sent by Philip the Second. And she does execute her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, who is conspiring against her to seize power. So she's a sharp lady, to say the least here. Henry IV of France, or Henry Navarre, he is going to marry the Valois daughter Margaret after her older brothers die. And Henry is a Huguenot, and how he maintains power here is he converts. He converts to Catholicism. Remember the famous quote, "Paris is worth a mass." And he issues the Edict of Nantes, which allows religious toleration. He allows the Huguenot towns to worship as they want, and even to fortify and self-protection. Peter the Great comes to power at a young age. He defeats the Streltsy. These are the palace guard. He defeats Charles XII of Sweden, and he moves the Russian borders to the Baltic Sea as he wins what's called the Great Northern War against Charles. And how he maintains power, he's got this tables of ranks system which imposes services to the Tsar in return for political or military advancement. He requires the nobles to dress as Westerners and to cut their beards, kind of a famous symbolic turning towards the West. And he sets up a procurator general over the reactionary and backward-looking Orthodox Church, at least according to him, backward-looking. Frederick II, or Frederick the Great, inherits power from his father. And some things that he does, he's called an enlightened despot or an enlightened monarch. He is seeking economic reform, and he's seeking to streamline the government. He engages in judicial reforms. He promotes agricultural reform. He allows religious freedom. He encourages immigrants to come into his country, in particular many of the Huguenots that are kicked out of France, and they settle and become farmers in reclaimed lands. He does attack Austria, and he seizes Silesia, and he maintains a large army, which was started by his father, but he maintains and expands on this army, and he uses it against the Austrians, this larger, the Holy Roman Empire here. He's attacking and peeling off Silesia. There's no claim to this state that's legit. He just wants it, and he takes it. And he maintains his father's general directory, and this is this sort of a super agency that runs most of the affairs of state. Catherine the Great, remember, she is a German bride to Peter the Third, and she has him offed. She has him killed by some of her the nobles these brothers who are, one of them is her lover, and she converts to Orthodoxy. She's a Lutheran originally, so she converts, and her husband, by the way, Peter, is German also, and he's a fan of the Prussians. So she's going to ingratiate herself with the nobility. She's going to have her husband killed. She converts to Orthodoxy. And some things that she does, she pursues some reforms. She's an enlightened monarch, at least that's where she falls in the textbook here. She pursues reforms in education, especially for women. She's a patroness of the arts. She suppresses a Cossack rebellion. Her army defeats the Crimean, what's called the Khanate, along the Black Sea, and she takes part of Poland, the biggest part in what's called the partition of Poland between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. James I of England, he is a steward with the Virgin Queen Elizabeth dying without offspring, without issue. She is going to be, Parliament will pass power on to a Scottish cousin who will take the title James I. And he is, he's a very eager supporter of the idea of divine right. He's got this famous quote, "No bishop, no king. You obey my bishops, or you're disobeying me." And the group that he's famous for persecuting are the Puritans. In American history, this is an era where the Puritans are fleeing England, and they're going to continue under his son Charles I. He also persecutes other groups, the Catholics, and there's some smaller groups that eventually will flee, such as the Quakers. But he's a believer in divine right, and he's enforcing religious conformity. Charles I, again, follows his dad, James I. He is a supporter also of divine right. He's got this quote, "Kings are like little gods on earth." And he is going to spread the ship tax to raise money when the Parliament won't raise it for him. He's going to jail dissidents, including parliamentarians. He's going to force loans. And his big error is he's going to force the episcopacy. This is the Episcopal or Anglican Church on Scotland, which will invade England and ally themselves with Parliament and unseat Charles I. Louis XIV of France, he falls into power through this dynastic succession, and he's going to, at a young age, win against the nobles who will fight against him, what are called the Wars of the Fronde. He is going to set up Versailles, sort of away from Paris, which is a little risky place to have your court if there's uprising in the streets. But the big thing is he's got thousands of these nobles required to attend Versailles if they want any privileges, if they want any power, any patronage from him. So he's going to create dependency on him, on his largesse, by making this magnificent palace at Versailles. The Edict of Fontainebleau overturns the Edict of Nantes, which had granted freedom of religion to the Huguenot Calvinist minority, and there's this intendant system, which is sort of not exactly a spy system, but it's a system of government supervision in the provinces. Relationship between politics and religion. The Dutch revolt, remember the Calvinists, who are also called Reformed, capital R, revolt against their Spanish Habsburg Catholic overlords. And this takes place during the 30 Years' War, and the Dutch are ultimately victorious. It's a David and Goliath story in many ways here. And the Dutch win their permanent freedom in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. And these 7 provinces peel off, and they will unite but keep their individual self-government. So the Dutch are famous for being feisty, for being combative against religious oppression and political oppression from the Spanish during this time period. The French Wars of Religion, remember Henry Navarre or Henry IV converts to Catholicism for peace. Remember the famous quote here, "Paris is worth a mass." Now he does allow religious freedom to bring peace across France. The English Civil War, remember, this is caused when Charles I, this is the second of the Stuarts, imposes the Book of Common Prayer on Scotland, imposing the episcopacy or the bishop system of the Anglican Church on these Calvinists. Remember, the Calvinists are Presbyterians. This is this representative government that comes from the individual churches set up by John Knox. No bishops in Scotland. And Scotland will invade. They'll make war against the king, allied with Parliament, who will join the Scots. You've got the king's Cavaliers versus the Roundhead army of the Parliament, led by Oliver Cromwell, who will defeat the king, capture him, try him, execute him. And Oliver Cromwell will set up what's called the Protectorate, also called the Commonwealth, also called the Republic, has a few names here. And he will impose strict Puritanism on England. And when he dies, the Parliament, weary of this Puritan dictatorship, will invite Charles II back. And this is called the Restoration. And he's followed by James II, who is Catholic, married to a Catholic. There's fear that Catholicism will be reimposed on England. And this leads to the 1688 Glorious Revolution, where Parliament will unseat this unpopular divine right-seeking James II, who just doesn't get it. And he's going to flee to France, and Parliament will go shopping for a new king and queen, and they'll find them in James's daughter Mary, who's married to the Stadtholder of the Netherlands, who comes over, and this is William and Mary. The 30 Years' War, this is when Calvinist Bohemia, which is in the orbit here of the Holy Roman Empire, throws Bohemia, in Prague, representatives of the Catholic Holy Roman Emperor are thrown out of a window, and this is called the Defenestration of Prague, which sparks this huge war, which lasts for 3 decades here. But the sides are, on the Protestant side, you've got the Dutch, you've got the Bohemians, you've got the English, you've got the Swedes and the Danes and northern German states. Against the southern German states, the Holy Roman Emperor, who's essentially Austrian here, and Spain. And keep in mind here, France. France is the unexpected ally of the Protestants. France is Catholic, but France puts political interests ahead of religious purity, and the biggest player next to France are the Austrian Catholics, and France is Catholic, so it becomes a political lean against Austria rather than support the Catholic Church. So France is on the side of the Protestants. What prevents the development of a united German state? The political and religious division of Germany. Remember, at the end of at the end of the Schmalkaldic Wars and at the end of the 30 Years' Wars, the German princes are given the choice of what religion they want in their state here. So there is sort of de facto religious and political freedom for the German states, even though, remember, there are these 7 electors who do choose the Habsburg monarch. 1588, the Spanish Armada. Why outcome here? Well, it is Philip II, who's the former husband of Mary II. Remember Bloody Mary? He outfits this armada. The idea is to invade England, bring it back into the Catholic fold, and he is defeated by Elizabeth's what are called the Sea Dogs, her captains, guys like Sir Francis Drake, who defeat the armada, and that's sort of the beginning of the decline of Spanish power. As far as the 8 ace short answer method, remember we went over this in class, that basically each part of your short answer, you want to have 3 sentences here. You want to answer the question. You want to give evidence that backs your answer, and then you want to expand. You want to provide some context, or what's the point here, or something interesting to note, but you want to have a 3-part answer. French Wars of Religion and the English Civil War, differences and similarities. Well, some similarities here, France and England. In England, you have a struggle against the ruling monarch's religion. You have the Puritans fighting the Anglican monarch, and who had demanded conformity to the Anglican Church. And in France, you have the Catholic Valois dynasty is demanding that the Huguenots, who are maybe only 10-15% of the population, but disproportionately they are the French nobility and the French middle class. The French king is demanding conformity. So it's in England, it's the Anglicans against the Puritans. In France, the Catholics against the Huguenots. Some differences here. You have in France, it's Catholics versus Protestants, where in England, it's Protestants versus Protestants. It is the Anglican Protestants, again, oppressing the minority Puritan, the Puritan and Presbyterian Prots in England and up in Scotland. In France, you have the king converting, a Huguenot, a Protestant converting to Catholicism and granting religious toleration. In England, Charles I, the king, the Anglican king, is overthrown. The New Model Army sets up Cromwell, who becomes a Puritan dictator. And in England, the Anglican king had invaded another country, Scotland. It's another difference from France. And Parliament, after it defeats Charles I, the Anglican king, they set up a Puritan dictator, and then they reestablish the Stuart dynasty under Charles II. And then after they get James II, who pulls this divine right thing again, and he's a Catholic to boot, they throw him out in this relatively bloodless revolution called the Glorious Revolution of 1588, and they go shopping for a new, good, solid Protestant king, and that would be William and his wife Mary. So in England, you have essentially the same dynasty, but with limits here. The Stuarts come back in power, and then they're thrown out, and they bring Mary over, who is a daughter to James II. Check your notes on some of the details here. I know we're doing this doing an audio here. But look at the dynastic succession, which the Stuarts stay in power in England. Contrast here in France, the Valois dynasty ends with a new Bourbon dynasty. Henry Navarre, or Henry IV here, is a Bourbon. So the Bourbons replace the Valois, but the Stuarts maintain power in England, for at least for a while. So there you go. Study smart, study early, study hard. Be sure to look at your notes. Look at some of the videos I've recommended. Look at your review sheet. If it's on the review sheet, it's going to be on the test. All right, signing out.